Once you begin to travel, or if you've ever started working for yourself, if you begin to have a little bit of income coming in from even a side business, it's very hard to go back. Once you have an initial amount of success or something that's new or different, then you just want to explore it more. You just want to see where it can go. And so, I always encourage people, just whatever you can do to have that moment of inspiration or exploration or discovery, whatever you can do to get that, then just do that. And I think that will lead to more opportunities later.
Welcome to the Portfolio Life with Jeff Goins. This is the show that helps you pursue work that matters, make a difference with your art, and discover your true voice. Chris Guillebeau is a world traveler in the truest sense, having traveled to every country in the world, all well before his 40th birthday. When Jeff sat down to talk with Chris, their conversation covered the areas of adventure, art, and entrepreneurship. If you want to live a more remarkable life, then the next 30 minutes will help you achieve that goal. Here's Jeff and adventurer Chris Guillebeau.
This is Jeff, and today I am honored and excited to introduce to you Chris Guillebeau, who is the New York Times best-selling author of The $100 Startup, and he is a blogger, also authored a book called The Art of Nonconformity, which is excellent. And Chris has a new course that we'll talk about in a little bit. But first, I want to welcome Chris.
Thanks, Jeff. It's an honor to be here.
Hey, man, it's great to talk with you. So, Chris, here's what I'd like to do, if you're cool with this. I'd like to talk about adventure, I'd like to talk about art, and I'd like to close with talking about entrepreneurship. Sound good?
Yeah, it sounds good. Whatever's best for the listeners.
Okay, cool. So you just finished visiting your last country in your trek to visit every country in the world. How does it feel?
It feels pretty good. I was actually kind of worried about it. This has been an 11-year process, 11 years unofficially, and then about 5 or 6 years since I've had the stated goal and been writing about it. So it depends on how you count it, but at any point, it's been a long journey, and so maybe a year or two ago, I started just kind of started feeling worried about the end. Like, what am I going to do? This has been my identity and my focus for a long time. So just a little bit of a midlife crisis or something. But then when it actually came to it, last month, we had about 150 friends and readers who came along for that final journey. It was actually really good. I actually really enjoyed it, and I'm glad to have done it. And I'm going to keep traveling and going different places. But I'm also glad to move on to something different.
So talk a little bit about the why behind that. I mean, obviously that's an awesome thing to have done, but what motivated you to set out to do this?
It's a couple of things. First of all, I've always really liked travel. I've just really enjoyed seeing the world and experiencing different cultures. I lived in West Africa for about 4 years with my wife, Jolie, and that was kind of my first initial experience of being in a really different place and understanding that the world works differently and depending on where you are, but it can also be really fun. So I liked that. And then after we moved back to the States, I just kept traveling every so often. I was doing a grad school program, and whenever I had a break, I would travel for a week or two. And then as I kept going places, I started counting them up, and I realized I'd been to a lot of places, and I thought, well, I've always been really attracted to setting goals and achievement-minded kind of stuff. And so I set a goal of visiting 100 countries. And then as I got closer to the 100 countries, I realized this is not a very challenging goal because I can just pick and choose, which countries I go to, and I can avoid the hard ones if I want. So that's when I decided to go to all 193 countries. So I was just attracted to travel. I was attracted to goal setting. I put them together, and that's how that all came about. For a long time, it was just a private thing. It wasn't, the blog and the business and all that kind of stuff came later.
Yeah. So, it's incredible, and that was something that piqued my interest when I started following you maybe a couple of years ago. Because it wasn't just the fact that you wanted to see every country in the world; it was you wanted to do it in a certain amount of time, right? You wanted to do it by a certain age, right?
Oh, right, exactly. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. So, when I think about goals, I tend to think every good goal has a deadline. Otherwise you don't really know when you're going to achieve it or whatever. So for me, I think it was 7 years ago. I forgot how many countries I'd been to at that point, maybe about 80 or so. I set the deadline of April 7th, 2013, which would be my 35th birthday. And so we actually, finished the final country in Norway about 3 weeks ago, depending on when people listen to this, but it was about 3 weeks ago now in Oslo.
Yeah, cool. So what's interesting about you, and I mean, it's obvious now that you've just talked about visiting every country in the world, something that I think few people get to do, but you have, this unique perspective on life and on the world, which is that it doesn't need to be boring, and in particular, that you don't have to wait until you retire to really live the life that you want to live. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I think most people feel like life sort of happens to them, and you're obviously living life on your own terms. This is something that you write about a lot. Why can we choose to live a remarkable life and do epic things?
What I think is interesting is there are so many more people who are doing interesting, remarkable things now, and I feel like people are starting to become aware that there are more possibilities and more opportunities than perhaps there were before, and travel is easier and can be more affordable, and not just travel, but we're able to ask a lot higher level questions than many of us were previously. We're able to ask things like, what kind of work would we like to do? How would we like to spend our free time? And so I don't feel like I've started anything in that regard. I feel like, if anything, I have this community of people that are doing amazing things. Maybe I'm an amplifier in some ways. I'm sure you're an amplifier as well in your community of shining a spotlight of people doing interesting things. So I guess to answer it more personally, for me, I guess I just wasn't good at doing things the normal way. I wasn't a good employee. When I tried to work for people, I just did a terrible job. And I was a juvenile delinquent, and I stole cars, which probably isn't the best, career path forward. But that's how it was when I was 15, and I kind of, evolved from then on. And, but then when I went overseas, I guess I was 21, 22 then, I just kind of learned like a whole new way of life. And once you experience things like that, once you begin to travel, or if you've ever started working for yourself, if you begin to have a little bit of income coming in from even a side business, it's very hard to go back. Once you have an initial amount of success or something that's new or different, then you just want to explore it more. You just want to see where it can go. And so, I always encourage people, just whatever you can do to have that moment of inspiration or exploration or discovery, whatever you can do to get that, then just do that. And I think that will lead to more opportunities later.
So I'm sitting here with your book, The Art of Nonconformity, open towards the beginning, and you've got this great little kind of, tongue-in-cheek list, which is 11 ways to be unremarkably average. So I'm just going to read that, and then we're going to talk about it. So 1, accept what people tell you at face value. 2, don't question authority. 3, go to college because you're supposed to, not because you want to learn something. 4, sit at a desk 40 hours a week for an average of 10 hours of productive work. 5, go overseas once or twice in your life, always to somewhere safe and easy, like England. 6, get the largest mortgage you qualify for and spend 30 years paying for it. 7, don't try to learn another language. Everyone else will eventually learn English. 8, think about writing a book, but never do it. I like that one. 9, think about starting your own business, but never do it. 10, don't stand out or draw attention to yourself. 11, jump through hoops, check off boxes. This is, the life that I think we feel that we have to live, that is, has been set aside for us. And I like you pointing out the fact that, look, like, you're not a guru. You're just joining a lot of weird people out there who are doing interesting things. My question is this: if we want to live a more interesting life, I mean, do we have to do scary things like travel the world? I mean, do we have to be crazy and do, I mean, you've gone to some crazy places and gotten into some really interesting situations.
Yeah, this is a good question. I'm thinking, do we have to do scary things? Well, I don't know. I don't think anyone has to travel the world. Of course not. Not everyone wants to travel the world, and that's fine. But I do think we should do things that stretch us and challenge us. I mean, the whole thing, like with that list you just read, it's not meant to be like condescending or insulting in any way. I mean, almost everything there, I've done that in different ways. I have, all the things that I wanted to do, it took me a long time to get around to doing them. The part about writing a book, I mean, you may have some history of this, of your own to share, but for me, like, I wanted to write for a long time, and for a long time I wanted to be a writer instead of, actually, being a writer and just sitting down and doing it. So I had to kind of overcome that. In terms of, like, when you say, like, you've gone to a lot of scary places, well, I've gone to a lot of amazing places and great places, and most of them weren't that scary, So I guess I do think it's important for all of us to think about, okay, what do we really want for ourselves? First of all, what do we want for ourselves? What do we really want to do or to become or to achieve? And how can we, since we do have all these opportunities today, how can we structure our life in a way that allows us to get closer to that? And then the second thing I always try to encourage people to think about is, okay, so you've got this amazing life, or at least you've got a pathway to an amazing life. What's next? What are you contributing? What are you doing for others? Because I think that's the other missing link. And I really do think everyone should think about that. Now, how they answer those questions, it's going to be totally different and individualistic, and that's great. But as far as I'm concerned, the more people thinking about their motivations and thinking about like what they want to do with their lives and how they can contribute something valuable, so much the better.
Yeah, and what I appreciated about your first book, you listed off all these amazing things that you had done, living in West Africa, traveling, having a lot of different jobs, working for yourself, starting businesses, starting to make money, and realizing this isn't it. And my question is, I see a lot of people, particularly in their 20s and 30s and even 40s, saying they want to live more adventurous lives. They don't want to settle for the status quo. And yet they run off and spend all their money and then, have to go back and work for the man. That they're kind of reckless. And I don't see you being reckless. I see you making calculated risks and, stepping out into places that allow you to grow, but you're also being very purposeful. And so what's the tension between I'm just having an adventure for myself because it makes me feel good and living a life of purpose?
Yeah, this is also a great question. I guess maybe it goes to thinking about what risk really is and, what security and what stability really is. And to me, it's like, to use this example that we've been going back and forth about, if you go off on a trip, it's probably not going to cost that much money. I mean, maybe it'll cost $1,000, $2,000 or something, but I don't really see that as being, a huge risk. If you go and spend that much money and you have a great trip, or even if you don't, it's not a huge risk. To me, a risk is more on the order of, borrowing hundreds of thousands of dollars, perhaps, for a specific higher education that may not actually relate to what you want to do, or to buying a home or buying a car. And it's not that I think anyone shouldn't do that. I just think, if you go on a trip and you decide, it was a waste of money and you want to do something different, well, that's fine. But, if you've invested like this huge amount of money into something different, then I think you have a different kind of problem. So I guess for me, it's more about being deliberate in the choices that I want to make and encouraging people to really think about what their values are. And if your value is adventure, then you have to make it a priority. It's like we say, you can probably have anything you want, but you can't have everything at the same time. So what is important? And if you want to make adventure part of your life, then maybe you'll have to, choose to do that or choose to pursue that and, against something else. So I guess it's more about thinking deliberately and then choosing those actions based on those priorities and values.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the family that, buys a house in the suburbs and, for $300,000 and has a mortgage and makes $70,000 a year, they're taking risks too. They're taking calculated risks, but they're taking financial risks there. I mean, they, if they get fired or something, all of a sudden they have this debt that, they have to pay off. And so, yeah, it's a good point. We're all risking something.
Right. So choose your risk, right?
That's
choose just as you choose your own adventure, choose your own risk.
Yeah, I was gonna. If you weren't gonna do it, I was gonna go to the choose your own adventure. And
I was a big fan of those books back in the day.
Yeah, I was talking to Tim Ferriss about that, and he said he lived next door. One of many Tim's crazy stories. He lived next door to the guy who wrote those books.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, just
funny.
Yeah, bizarre. Okay, so I want to move on to the next topic. Let's talk about art, which I want to define broadly as just making a difference in the world. And your blog or go by the title of The Art of Nonconformity. But, I mean, you yourself are an artist, I think. I don't know if you call yourself that. First of all, you live in Portland, and how can you live in Portland and not be an artist?
Right.
But you're also, you're a musician, you're a writer, you've got some artistic tendencies to your life. You're also an entrepreneur and a lot of other things. But I see you living a creative life, and I want to know what motivates some of the decisions that don't make sense. For example, I'm going to have an event and I'm going to make a profit. I'm speaking as Chris Gillibo, by the way, and then I'm going to give away $100,000 to all of the attendees. Like, that doesn't make sense, but I see that and I go, that's really interesting. And, you're doing some things in your life that get people talking and get people thinking differently. And I want to know why.
Because it's exciting. Because it's fun, and I think all of us have to pay attention to what makes us excited, right? And so, let's do a couple of examples. You mentioned the thing that we did last year at the conference where we invested $100,000 directly back into the lives of all the attendees. When I first thought about that, I thought, this is a crazy, ridiculous idea, and it sounds so exciting. It would be so fun. It would be so fun and so meaningful. And if you give 1,000 people $100 each, probably not all of them are going to go and do something great with it. Some of them will just go out to dinner or whatever, and that's fine. But probably some of them will do something interesting. They probably will do things that we haven't thought of. And so I was just attracted to maybe the ridiculousness, if that's a word, of it. I just thought it would be fun. And so the same is true with visiting every country in the world. I was like, that is crazy. Therefore, I like it. I'm writing a new book about quests right now. And I'm talking to all these different people who've done like crazy things. There's a guy who walked for 17 years without using a car. Other people have like circumnavigated, the globe, and there's all kinds of different stuff. And they all say the same kind of thing. They're like, it was difficult and it was challenging. It was crazy, but that's why I did it. So I guess I'm just motivated by things that I find to be fun and enjoyable. And I hope other people will enjoy them too. But if not, at least I know that I still will.
So Chris, you're a husband. You are a business owner, and you have people work for you. You pay them money to do work when you're not gallivanting the globe. I'm sure that you have like some bills to pay.
Sure.
And even when you are gallivanting the globe, I'm sure you have bills to pay.
Sure.
Like you're not a dude who lives in a cave. I'm sure there are people in Portland who do that.
Yeah, probably.
But the point is, you have responsibilities, right? And so how do you balance this, hey, this is fun, I'm going to do something crazy. Again, we're talking about risk-taking. How do you balance that with the responsibilities? How do you, I know what it's like to have a crazy idea and then go tell my wife about it and, realize, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. And so how do you manage the fact that you have people relying on you? You don't want to let them down, but at the same time, you do kind of want to push life to the limits because it's fun and fulfilling and interesting. How do you balance that tension?
Yeah, I think experience produces confidence. And the more you do these kind of things, the more your vision expands to do something even bigger. So with going to every country, as I said, I didn't just go to 2 countries and then said, oh, I want to go to the 191 other countries. Like I went to like 50 first, and then I slowly began to get my head around the idea of like possibly go to 100, and later it kind of crept up. And so, the more you do things, the more confidence you have. I guess I also try to have a long-term perspective. So, with the conference, this is something we want to keep doing. And, we did it the first year and people really enjoyed it. We actually took a financial loss the first year, and we knew that wouldn't be sustainable. Like, I don't want to actually pay $30,000 for people to come to my conference. But then the second year, I just thought this is an investment. I used that word before. Like, this is not so much giving money away as it is I'm investing in a career, and people will want to come back. And and then the other thing is, like, I have a lot of business projects now. And I'm not super wealthy, but my business does well. I'm a successful author. I have products that sell. I have good passive income. So, since I built this over a number of years, it does allow me to take more risks. But for anyone who is listening and doesn't have that, I would say you can still take risks. You can still start with what you have, and everybody has the ability to contribute to something, and everyone has the ability to do something big. And if you don't have what you think is like a huge vision, then just start with whatever it is that you want to do.
So this seems like an appropriate place to kind of segue into the third part of the conversation, which is about entrepreneurship, which, the word entrepreneur literally means risk taker. So
really, I've never heard that definition before.
Really? That's what it means. Yeah, it's French for risk taker.
That's great.
Yeah. So you've been an entrepreneur for a long time, for most of your adult life, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, for about.
Yeah. Can you talk about what got you started?
What got me started was initially a motivation to do anything I possibly could to not work for someone else. So this was age 19. The motivation was not super higher level. I wasn't like trying to change the world or anything. It was just like I had delivered pizza. I had worked at FedEx in the middle of the night, like hauling boxes, actually in Memphis, Tennessee, not too far from you. And these jobs did not offer a lot of advancement potential. They were not high-paying jobs. And, so initially I was just like, how can I do something? And so that's how I started learning about working online, which is like now 13 years ago when people were just starting to do this and, buying and selling different things and learning about website design and all this different stuff. And the initial motivation was just like, was freedom, essentially. Freedom and independence. I want to be on my own. I want to do some different things. I was a jazz musician and I loved playing music, but music, doesn't pay that well. At least it didn't for me at the time. So initially it was just, how can I create something that can support a lifestyle that I hope to have? And then I used that's kind of the same principle to allow Jolie and I to move overseas for about 4 years. I supported ourselves from the business that I had. And then it was only kind of as I, got a little bit older and once I started writing that I was like, okay, it was good that I was able to pay the bills for a while, but I would actually like to have a real business. I would actually like to, to think a bit more long term. So that's probably just been in the past 5 years that I've been working on that.
Mm-hmm. And so what have you learned as an entrepreneur, as a risk taker? What have you learned in the past decade or so about yourself, about work, and about the world?
Yeah, that's a big question. What have I learned about myself and the world?
Just a little question, not a big one.
I'm trying to think how to soundbite this down a little bit. I guess I've learned, what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And, I have some clear strengths that have allowed me to build the business such as it is and to allow me to take those risks, as you called it, which I still think is really fascinating because I actually think entrepreneurship is a safe choice, for a lot of people, not necessarily for everyone. But I think of entrepreneurship as a conservative choice for a lot of people, not necessarily like this crazy, risk-taking thing. But we could go on with that a bit. Let's see, where were we? Oh, yeah, what have I learned? So I've learned what I'm good at and as well as what I'm not good at. And I'm pretty good at starting things. I'm definitely not as good at continuing things and maintaining things. I'm always interested in, what can I create next? I'm really motivated by creating. I like, building projects. I like writing books. I like going on tour to meet people. But I'm not the best at, maintaining something that I've set up. Not so good with employees either. You mentioned that I have people who work for me. I actually have very few people who work for me. And part of that is by choice. But I think the other part is perhaps I'm starting to think it's just because of weakness, because I'm not good at delegating tasks and not good at building a team around me. And so I'm trying to get better about that.
Yeah, I can relate to that. So I want to talk about your book, The $100 Startup. It was a bestseller, resonated with a lot of people. What I really appreciated about the book is the fact that you identify and really emphasize the ease it takes to start a business, start a side gig, start something that can support you, can supplement your income, can allow you more freedom, can give you a little bit of extra income to go on a vacation, whatever you want to do. It's cheap, it's less. It can take less than $100 to start a legit business. And I realized this a few years ago when I had no idea of ever working for myself. My wife wanted to become a photographer, and she just wanted to do some portrait photography on the side. Got a decent DSLR camera just to get started, and she needed a website, and so. I spent like a weekend putting together a website for her, buying the domain, getting her like her own, professional email address, just little simple things that like make seem like they make a big deal. And at the end of the weekend, she had a website and I was like, wow, this cost like $25.
Yep.
At the same time, my dad was starting a restaurant and he was paying very little overhead, but it was, hundreds of dollars a month, which is pretty cheap to start a business as well.
Still pretty cheap, yeah. For a restaurant, usually you're paying like thousands of dollars a month.
Right, but I mean, we're talking about a fraction of the cost. Like my wife paid $30 to have her website for a year. And then next year she's got to pay another $30.
Right.
And so there is very little risk in starting a business. Obviously, it takes a lot of work to build up momentum and do something that could support you. But it's pretty easy to start. And you found this wasn't just true for you or me or my wife. I mean, you found this was true for what? I mean, how many case studies are in the $100 Startup? Hundreds of people?
Yeah, exactly. No, we did a 2-year study of about 1,500 people.
Jeez.
And from all over the world, all different walks of life, men and women, different ages, and that to me was the best part of the whole experience of writing and publishing the book was, it's not just my story or your story, because, the problem is if you and I share our stories, then people are like, oh, those are great, but maybe I can't relate to Jeff, or maybe Chris had some advantage that I don't have, or whatever. And so I was trying to say, like, look at what is happening in the world. This is not just a blogger saying something. I mean, this is like a movement. Of people like really creating their own freedom in a very easy way, at least by getting started. And as you said, it takes a lot of work to run a business, of course. But the point is, the costs have greatly lowered. Access to information is lowered. Probably everyone listening to this has a PayPal account. I would bet that at least 90% plus of people have paid something with PayPal. So therefore, you have a means of getting paid already. You can listen to what Jeff said and get your own website if you don't have one, over the course of a weekend for $30 or less or whatever. Even if it doesn't look amazing right from the beginning, you can, offer a service to someone. You can offer a specific consulting service. That's what a lot of people did in the $100 startup, is they focused on some knowledge that they had that they were, offering to share with other people. And it just grows from there. I mean, that to me was the best part of it, was hearing all these different stories and then hopefully sharing them in a way that people can relate to and then adapt and do it, in their own way.
What was really cool about the book was it wasn't this like plan from how to go from making, the average household income in America, which is like, $40,000 a year or something, to making $1 million in 6 months. And it's so easy. And all you have to do is get 10 of your friends to buy this thing.
Yeah. Right.
In fact, a lot of people, were making a good living, in some sort of, as a service professional, lawyer, doctor, whatever, and they're making $200,000 a year, but they're
which is fantastic. That's great.
But they're miserable, right? And they're not living life on their own terms, and it's not what they were made to do. And they're in some ways, they're sort of taking a step back in terms of income, but they're really stepping into freedom, and they're starting a yoga practice or becoming a consultant or a coach or whatever. And, they step back and make half of what they made before, which is still a really good living, but now they're fully alive and they're free to, live life on their own terms.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely try to focus on happiness a lot. I definitely try to focus on like, why are you doing what you do? And yes, money is great, but money ultimately is a tool. You use it to access something else, and it doesn't really do anybody good if it's just kind of sitting there. So there were stories of people who had really scaled their business and did very, very well. But at least everybody in the book did at least $50,000 a year. And some of those people had never, owned a business before, and then maybe the $50,000 a year was actually a side income or something. And they still had a day job. So the focus is definitely, about freedom and happiness and value overall.
So if it's easy to start, and lots of people are doing this, and there's this movement, and lots of people say, I'd like to start something or do a business, or lots of people say, I'm good at this, but I don't quite know what to do with that. If it's so easy to begin, and even to scale to a level that you could live off of, why don't people do it? Why don't more people do this?
Well, I think a lot of people are doing it. I mean, I do think it's becoming much, much more common. I don't think it's mainstream yet, certainly, but I do think it's becoming much, much more common, to meet people, not just in like urban, centers or, cities where like change happens, but you meet people like all over the place that are doing it. But as to why more don't, I think that's more of it's the same kind of question of saying like, everybody who wants to write a book, just like in the position you and I were a few years ago, where we both like, I've always wanted to write a book. I've been talking about this for 10 years, but we never did, until we finally got over that. I really do believe that probably the biggest obstacles in anything like that are more internal than external. I think the biggest obstacles are, we all have our own fears and our own insecurities, our own anxieties. Maybe we're just busy with other stuff. We haven't prioritized. So I think we're all kind of at fault of, wanting to do things, but not creating an environment around us that allows us to do those things. So I guess one of the things I try to do, which I know you do as well, you do it very well, is encouraging people to start with where they are, with what they have, and then, seeing where things go from there.
So you've got a great course about this that's aptly named Adventure Capital, and people listening can find out more about that at yearofprofit.com. Could you just give maybe a few practical tips? Let's say I'm listening to this. I want to start. I've read the $100 Startup. I love it. I'm chomping at the bit to jump into this. I want more freedom. I want to do this, but I need a few steps. I need a roadmap. What would you recommend that people could do, in a short, obviously condensed version?
Great. Short, condensed version. I think all of us like to make starting a small business very complicated, or maybe we don't all like to do that, but that's what we've always heard. And so in the story you just told a few minutes ago about your wife's photography business, it was very easy to get going. A business is just three things. It's a product or a service. It's a group of people interested in that product or service, and it's a means of getting paid. So I encourage people to focus on only those three things, in the beginning. And the third one's really easy because you have a PayPal account. So that's sorted, If you're trying to figure out, okay, what is it that I'm going to offer? What is the product or service? People often say, well, think about what you're good at. And that's not a bad start. But I try to go a little bit further and say, okay, what do people ask you about? Are there certain questions that people always ask you? Is there some topic that you have expertise in that people always kind of come to you about and ask you, for advice on? That always shows that you're a perceived authority in this topic, and it also shows that there's a demand for that kind of information or that kind of knowledge or resource. So if you're not sure, what area to focus on, I would think about that. Then I would do whatever you could do to get the website up, or if it's an offline thing, however you're going to, put that offer out to the world, I would encourage you to do that as quickly as possible. And what I heard over and over from talking to people is that the first sale, whenever they got their first sale, they found that very empowering. Even if it was just, a $50 thing or something even less than that. If they sold something for $10, they talked about how excited they felt because all of a sudden they're making income from a source that's different from their employer. And that was the beginning for a lot of people to then go on and grow their business much more. But they didn't wait 6 months. They didn't wait a year. They didn't write a business plan that no one else would ever read. They got started as quickly as possible.
Love it. And I really love that you didn't tell people to just go do whatever they love doing and they'll get paid to be unique, special snowflakes.
Right. Yes. That's worked out for you pretty well, Jeff. Most of us, we can't just get paid to be a snowflake.
Yeah, and I think, obviously, you've got passions and you were made to do something specific. Sure. But it is important to think about what you talked about, the audience part. Who needs what I have? And a great way to answer that question is, well, what do people already ask me for? What do I help them with? What advice do I give out regularly? Because it shows there's a demand for that. And if there's a demand for it, then there's a value, which means you can charge for it.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Love it. Well, let's do this really quickly, and then we'll close. I asked some people on Twitter some questions that I should ask you, and so let's do a very quick lightning round. We'll do 3 questions.
Got it.
One about adventure. So Andy says, do all of our adventures need to be epic? And then he hashtags it travel the world. So I think, it's going back to that question that I was asking you, about in terms of living a riskier, more adventurous life. Do our adventures need to be epic, or are there different types of adventures that we take, in different seasons of life? What do you think?
I guess I wonder what the word epic means. Not all of our adventures have to be 10-year quests. That's certainly true. Adventure is about change. It's about mixing up your environment, and there's lots of different ways that you can do that. So I guess the answer is no, adventure by nature doesn't necessarily have to always be epic.
So if I'm a dad, this is sort of hypothetical, but sure. I know Andy. If I'm a dad living in South Dakota and I've got 3 kids and a job, obviously that's not you, Chris, but how do I redefine epic, or how do I redefine adventure in that context? I've
got a great story, and it's not going to be lightning round, but it's a great story. So this is the story of Sasha Martin, who actually lives in Oklahoma. She's very much in this situation, and that she has a young daughter. She's got this family. She grew up all over the world. Her dad worked somewhere in Europe or something. So then she ends up in Oklahoma, and she's like, well, okay, this is where I have to be right now, but I do miss adventure and traveler, and I want my daughter to grow up with an international perspective. So she's like, I can't visit every country in the world, but she had a background in food science. I think she had a degree in culinary something or other. And so she decided to cook a meal from every country in the world. And she's been doing this for 3 years. So once a week, she researches this full-on menu. She plays music from that culture or country. And she's, the whole family has totally transitioned the diet. They're eating all kinds of stuff that they've never eaten before. Her daughter has grown up, eating international cuisine. Her daughter's 3 years old now, and she uses chopsticks or silverware or her hands, equally fluent. So that's an example of something that maybe you don't think it's epic, but I think it's very, very meaningful. And I think that's something that, that anyone can do in their own way.
Yeah, love that. That's great. Okay, second question. When do you plan to visit all the planets in the solar system?
Right now I'm kind of hindered on that because it's hard to get to them, right? So, I mean, you can do the Richard Branson thing. You can go into space if you have $200,000, but even that, it's not really totally legit because you just go to like a certain altitude level or whatever. So on that, I'm waiting for some more planets to open up.
Okay, I just thought that was a fun question to ask. Okay, last question is from Haley. She says, "What are the biggest pitfalls you've seen when people go from being solopreneurs to having a team?"
That's what I'm figuring out right now myself, man, because I've been a solopreneur for 10 years. Wow. And I guess what's the biggest pitfall? Realizing that not everyone thinks like you do. I have a certain way of thinking, and then I assume the rest of the world thinks the same way, and obviously they don't. So I guess I'm learning to communicate better and to maybe be more specific about what's in my head and not expecting other people to have access to my brain.
Yeah. Great. Well, I give us probably a C+ on the lightning.
My answers were a bit long, so I apologize to the audience, but they were good questions.
It was my fault. I'm a talker. Hey, Chris, I really enjoyed this. Thanks so much for what you do, how you inspire people not only through your words, but through your actions. Let us know when you've got your Kickstarter campaign for the space shuttle adventure through all the planets.
I'll look forward to the $100,000 donation coming from Franklin. See. Thanks, man. Thanks for your pledge.
That's your next book, the $100,000 startup. Hey, so people who are listening, you can find Chris at chrisguillebeau.com. You can also find out more about his book, The $100 Startup, at 100startup.com.
That's right.
And his new course is Adventure Capital, which you can find out at yearofprofit.com. Chris, it was a delight and a pleasure. You are an officer and a gentleman.
Thank you, sir. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, man. See ya.
For anyone who is listening and doesn't have that, I would say you can still take risks. You can still start with what you have, and everybody has the ability to contribute to something, and everyone has the ability to do something big. And if you don't have what you think is like a huge vision, then just start with whatever